What if I told you that the woman they invited to mock at a lavish wedding turned out to be the one person who could make or break the groom's billion-dollar empire? Sometimes karma doesn't just knock. It walks through the front door wearing designer clothes and holding all the cards. Let me tell you about Serena Hayes. 28 years old, brilliant, hardworking, and the kind of person who could walk into any room and make it better just by being there. She had built her marketing consulting business from absolutely nothing, working 16-hour days and sleeping on her sister's couch for months until she could afford her own place. But success hadn't changed her. She still drove her old Honda, still shopped at Target, and still believed that treating people with kindness mattered more than the size of your bank account. So when that thick, cream-colored envelope showed up in her mailbox with gold-embossed lettering, Serena's hands actually trembled as she opened it. It was from Brittany Chen, her college roommate, inviting her to what the invitation described as the wedding of the century. The paper was so expensive, it practically screamed money. And the venue was one of those exclusive country clubs that required 3 references just to get a dinner reservation. Here's the thing about Serena and Brittany's relationship. It had ended badly, really badly. I'm talking about the kind of falling out that leaves scars on your soul. It happened during their senior year at a party where Brittany, drunk on champagne and her own sense of superiority, had stood up in front of 50 people and announced that Serena was only at their prestigious university because of financial aid. Our little charity case, she had called her, laughing while Serena stood there, humiliated beyond words. That was 6 years ago, and they hadn't spoken since. So why was Brittany inviting her to her wedding now? Serena stared at that invitation for 3 days, turning it over in her hands, trying to figure out what game was being played. Her sister begged her not to go. She's up to something, she warned. People like Brittany don't change, they just get better at hiding their cruelty. But something inside Serena needed closure. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just the stubborn part of her that refused to let Brittany's opinion define her worth. She had built something beautiful from nothing. A successful business, genuine friendships, a life she was proud of. Part of her wanted Brittany to see that the girl she had tried to humiliate had not only survived, but thrived. So Serena went shopping for a dress, something elegant but not too expensive, something that would let her blend in without breaking her budget. She had no idea that she was walking into a trap, that Brittany had invited her for one reason, and one reason only: to be the evening's entertainment, the object of ridicule that would make everyone else feel superior. As Serena stood in front of her mirror that evening, adjusting her simple black dress and taking a deep breath, she had no way of knowing that this night would change everything. She thought she was just going to a wedding. She had no idea she was about to meet her destiny. The moment I stepped out of my car at the Emerald Hills Country Club, I knew I was in trouble. This wasn't just a wedding. This was a display of wealth so obscene, it made my modest black dress feel like a burlap sack. Valets in crisp white uniforms rushed to park cars that cost more than most people's houses, while guests glided past me in designer gowns that probably had their own insurance policies. Brittany appeared at the entrance, like she was posing for a magazine cover, all flowing white silk and practiced smiles. But when her eyes landed on me, something cold flickered behind that perfect facade. "Serena," she squealed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh my God, look at you. You look so comfortable." The way she said it, like comfortable was a disease, made my stomach clench. She guided me through the crowd, with her arm linked through mine, but I could feel the performance in it. "Everyone, this is my old college roommate Serena. She's doing, well, what exactly are you doing these days?" Her laugh was like broken glass, sharp and cutting. I started to explain about my consulting business, but she had already moved on, leaving me standing there while she fluttered away to more important guests. The seating arrangement was my first real clue about what this night was really about. While everyone else was directed to elegant tables near the altar, I was escorted to a table so far in the back, I might as well have been in a different zip code. The other people at my table looked just as confused as I felt. Elderly relatives who clearly didn't fit Brittany's aesthetic, a few awkward teenagers, and what I later learned were the obligation invites that every bride has to include, but doesn't actually want there. But the real humiliation began during cocktail hour. I was standing by the bar, trying to make small talk with the bartender, when Brittany's maid of honor, Vanessa, approached with a glass of red wine. She was everything Brittany was, blonde, beautiful, and cruel, in that effortless way that comes from never having to struggle for anything. "Oh, Serena," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I've heard so much about you." And then, as if in slow motion, she stumbled, or pretended to stumble, and that entire glass of wine went cascading down the front of my dress. The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation in a 10-foot radius stopped as people turned to stare. Vanessa's apology was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. I hope that wasn't too expensive." The emphasis on "too expensive" was like a knife twist, and I watched as people pulled out their phones, some already recording what they clearly thought was hilarious. Standing there with wine dripping down my dress, surrounded by people who saw my humiliation as entertainment, I felt something break inside me. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty, and I was the main event. I spent 10 minutes in that bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror while trying to scrub red wine out of my dress with paper towels. My hands were shaking, not from embarrassment anymore, but from pure anger. I had two choices: leave with whatever dignity I had left, or walk back out there and show them that Serena Hayes doesn't break that easily. I chose to stay. When I returned to my table, dabbing at the stain that now looked like a badge of humiliation across my chest, I noticed him immediately. He was sitting in the empty chair next to mine, and honestly, my first thought was that he was lost. This man clearly belonged at the head table, not hidden away in social Siberia with the rest of us rejects. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my car, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself to anyone. But what struck me most wasn't his obvious wealth. It was the way he looked at me, not with pity, not with curiosity about my wine-stained dress, but with genuine interest, like I was someone worth knowing. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, even though he was already sitting. His voice was warm, educated, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "I'm Dante, and I have to say, I've been watching what's been happening to you tonight, and I'm not impressed with your hosts." I almost laughed. Here was this obviously important man, probably some business associate of the groom, acknowledging what everyone else was pretending not to see. "I'm Serena," I said, "and honestly, I'm starting to think this whole thing was a mistake." But then something magical happened. We started talking, really talking. Not the surface-level small talk you expect at weddings, but deep, meaningful conversation about business, about travel, about books we'd read, and dreams we'd chased. He asked about my consulting work with genuine curiosity, nodding thoughtfully as I described the challenges of building a business from scratch. When I mentioned a marketing campaign I'd developed for a struggling nonprofit, his eyes lit up with interest. "That's brilliant," he said, leaning forward. "You turned their biggest weakness into their greatest strength. That takes real vision." Nobody had ever described my work as visionary before, and coming from this sophisticated stranger, it meant everything. For the first time all evening, I forgot about the wine stain, forgot about Brittany's cruelty, forgot about being the evening's entertainment. I was just Serena, talking to someone who saw my worth without needing my resume or my bank statement to validate it. That's when I noticed the shift. The groom, Richard, had approached our table, and the color had drained completely from his face. He was staring at Dante like he'd seen a ghost. And when he whispered something urgent to Brittany, I watched her perfect composure crack for the first time all night. Something big was about to happen. and I had no idea I was sitting right in the center of it. The change in the room's atmosphere was so sudden, it felt like someone had flipped a switch. Richard Sterling, the groom who had barely acknowledged my existence all evening, was now standing beside our table, looking like he was about to throw up. His hands were actually trembling as he stared at Dante, and when he spoke, his voice cracked like a teenager's. "Mr. Morrison," he stammered, I didn't realize you were here. If I had known, we would have seated you at the head table, of course." The desperation in his voice was painful to watch, but what confused me was how he kept glancing between Dante and me, like he was trying to solve some impossible equation. Dante's response was casual, almost bored. "Oh, I'm perfectly comfortable here, Richard. Serena and I were having a fascinating conversation about innovative marketing strategies. She was just telling me about a campaign that increased client engagement by 300%. He turned to me with that same genuine smile. "You know, I've been looking for exactly that kind of creative thinking for a new venture I'm launching." That's when it hit me like a freight train. The whispers spreading through the reception, the sudden panic in Richard's eyes, the way every conversation within 20 feet had stopped dead. Dante Morrison wasn't just some wealthy wedding guest. He was the Dante Morrison, the billionaire tech investor whose name I'd seen in Forbes magazine, whose company had revolutionized 3 different industries, whose investment decisions could make or break entire corporations. And Richard's tech startup, the one that had paid for this extravagant wedding, was completely dependent on Morrison Industries' funding. I watched in real time as the news spread through the wedding party like wildfire. Brittany appeared at our table so fast she might have teleported. Her perfect smile now stretched into something manic and desperate. "Dante," she gushed, using his first name like they were old friends. "What an honor. I had no idea you knew Richard so well. But here's the beautiful part." Dante barely looked at her. Instead, he continued our conversation as if we were the only 2 people in the room. "So tell me more about your approach to brand rehabilitation," he said, completely ignoring Brittany's attempts to insert herself into our discussion. The woman who had introduced me as her charity case roommate was now practically bouncing on her toes, trying to get the attention of a man who was far more interested in my marketing insights than her designer wedding dress. And Vanessa, the maid of honor who had accidentally spilled wine on me. She appeared with club soda and a handful of expensive napkins, stammering apologies and claiming the spill had been completely unintentional. The most surreal moment came when Dante, right there in front of everyone, pulled out his business card and handed it to me. "I'd like to discuss a consulting contract with you," he said. "My new sustainable energy project needs someone with your creative vision. Are you interested in changing the world?" The same people who had been recording my humiliation an hour earlier were now desperately trying to get selfies with me. What happened next was like watching karma choreograph its own ballet. Richard, the groom who hadn't said 2 words to me all evening, suddenly couldn't stop apologizing. He pulled Dante aside, but their conversation wasn't as private as he thought. I could hear every desperate word as he begged for forgiveness, explaining that he had no idea I was being treated poorly, that it would never happen again, that their business partnership meant everything to him. Dante's response was quiet but devastating. "Richard, how you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you tells me everything I need to know about your character. And right now, I'm questioning whether Morrison Industries should continue our partnership with someone who allows guests at his wedding to be humiliated for entertainment." I watched a multi-million-dollar business relationship hang in the balance, all because of how I'd been treated. The power shift was so complete, it was almost dizzying. Suddenly, I wasn't the charity case anymore. I was the person who could save or destroy the groom's entire future with a single word to Dante. But here's what I'm most proud of. When Richard finally approached me directly, practically in tears, as he apologized for his bride's behavior, I didn't gloat. I didn't twist the knife or demand he grovel. I simply said, "Thank you for the apology. I hope you've learned something tonight about treating people with basic human decency." Brittany's transformation was the most spectacular to witness. The woman who had called me comfortable and seated me at the reject table was now hanging on my every word, laughing too loudly at things I said that weren't even jokes, and claiming we had always been so close in college. When she insisted we take pictures together, for old time's sake, I politely declined. "You know what, Brittany?" I said calmly, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I think these pictures should be authentic, and we both know our friendship ended 6 years ago, when you decided my financial background made me less worthy of respect. Let's not pretend otherwise now." The silence that followed was beautiful. As the evening wound down, Dante and I exchanged genuine contact information. This wasn't about the spectacle anymore. It was about two professionals who had discovered they could help each other succeed. He was impressed by my ideas, and I was excited about the possibility of working on something that could actually make a difference in the world. 6 months later, my consulting firm had expanded internationally, working exclusively with sustainable energy companies through my partnership with Morrison Industries. I had moved into a beautiful downtown office, hired 3 employees, and was featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine as one of the year's most innovative consultants. Brittany's marriage, meanwhile, struggled under the weight of Richard's business problems. Dante had eventually renewed their partnership, but with significant restrictions that limited their growth potential. They were surviving, but barely thriving. A perfect metaphor for what happens when you build your happiness on other people's humiliation. The last I heard, they were selling their dream house to cover their debts. Karma, it seems, has perfect timing. And that's how Serena Hayes discovered that sometimes the worst night of your life can become the doorway to your greatest triumph. This story isn't just about karma. It's about the incredible power of maintaining your dignity when others try to strip it away, and how authentic connections can change everything in ways you never imagined possible. If this story gave you chills and reminded you why kindness always wins in the end, I need you to smash that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them, but by how they carry themselves through the storm. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in Serena's shoes? Would you have stayed at that wedding? Or would you have walked out the moment that wine hit your dress? Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we've got more incredible stories of justice, triumph, and unexpected twists coming your way. Stories about real people who refused to let bullies define their worth and ended up changing their entire lives in the process. Remember, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Until next time, keep believing that good things happen to good people. Sometimes you just have to wait for the universe to catch up.